Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Crimson Revelations. The kitchen knife clattered to the marble floor, painting droplets of crimson across the pristine white tiles. Malcolm Hicks stood frozen in the doorway, his briefcase slipping from nerveless fingers as he took in the scene before him. His 17-year-old son Dylan pressed a bloody dishcloth against his shoulder, tears streaming down his face. His wife Cassandra stood across the kitchen island, her perfectly manicured hands still trembling, her designer blouse splattered with evidence of what she'd done. My wife stabbed our son with a kitchen knife during an argument. Blood was everywhere. The words formed in Malcolm's mind, but never reached his lips. The sight rendered him speechless. Dylan looked up at his father with pleading eyes. "Dad, It's just a scratch," Cassandra interrupted, her voice sharp and defensive. He was being disrespectful, threatening me. I had to defend myself. Malcolm's hand instinctively reached for his phone, but before he could dial, his father Robert Hicks materialized beside him, snatching the device with surprising speed for a 70-year-old man. When I tried to call the hospital, Dad took my phone. "It's just a scratch. Don't overreact." Robert's voice boomed through the kitchen, dismissive and controlling as always. May Hicks, Malcolm's mother, emerged from the living room where she'd apparently been watching the entire drama unfold. "Your wife was defending herself. He must have provoked her," she declared, her loyalties clearly aligned with Cassandra, as they had been for the past 15 years of Malcolm's marriage. Malcolm's steel-gray eyes moved methodically from his bleeding son to his unrepentant wife, then to his parents who seemed more concerned with protecting Cassandra than their own grandson. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside him. The successful architect who'd built his life on precision and careful planning began constructing something entirely different in his mind. They had no idea what I would do next, but Malcolm did. He'd always been a man who thought 10 moves ahead, who could envision the completed building before laying the first brick. Now, as he watched his family reveal their true nature, he began blueprinting something far more intricate than any structure he'd ever designed. "Dylan," Malcolm said quietly, his voice carrying an edge his son had never heard before. "Let me see that wound." He gently moved the dishcloth aside, revealing a 3-inch gash that would definitely need stitches. It was deep enough to scar, deep enough to have been dangerous if it had hit an artery. "We're going to the hospital," Malcolm announced, his tone brooking no argument. "Malcolm, you're overreacting," Cassandra said, but there was something in her husband's eyes that made her take a step back. "Am I?" Malcolm retrieved his phone from his father's grip with a swift motion that left Robert stumbling. "Because what I see is my wife attacking my son with a deadly weapon while my parents cover for her. What I see is a family that has revealed their true priorities." As Malcolm helped Dylan toward the door, he caught sight of his reflection in the hallway mirror. The man staring back at him looked the same, dark hair slightly graying at the temples, broad shoulders, the kind of face that inspired confidence in clients and respect from colleagues. But behind those gray eyes, something had awakened, something cold and calculating and utterly merciless. Malcolm Hicks had built his reputation on never leaving a project unfinished. This would be no exception. Chapter 2. Architects of Deception. 3 hours later, Malcolm sat in the hospital waiting room as Dylan received 12 stitches and a tetanus shot. The doctors had asked uncomfortable questions about how the injury occurred, their suspicious glances making it clear they'd seen domestic violence before. Malcolm had answered truthfully. His wife had stabbed his son during an argument. The paperwork would create a paper trail, though he doubted Cassandra realized that yet. Malcolm's mind drifted to the past as he waited. He'd met Cassandra Curry at a charity gala 15 years ago, drawn to her striking beauty and seemingly gentle nature. She'd been working as an interior designer then, struggling to establish herself in Denver's competitive market. Malcolm, already a successful architect at 35, had been charmed by her vulnerability and determination. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of romantic dinners and weekend getaways. Cassandra had seemed to fit perfectly into his vision of the future, intelligent, beautiful, and appreciative of the lifestyle his success could provide. They'd married within a year, and Dylan had followed 2 years later. But red flags had appeared early, though Malcolm had chosen to ignore them. Cassandra's temper, her manipulative behavior toward his parents, who'd inexplicably adored her from the start, her expensive taste that seemed to grow more extravagant each year. She'd gradually stopped working, claiming she needed to focus on being a wife and mother, though Malcolm had noticed she spent more time at the spa than with Dylan. Then there were the unexplained absences, the new clothes and jewelry she claimed were gifts from friends, the way she'd started guarding her phone like a state secret. Malcolm had suspected for months, but he'd been too focused on his work, too trusting of the woman he'd built his life around. "Mr. Hicks," Dr. Patricia Williams approached, pulling him from his thoughts. "Dylan's doing well. The wound was clean, and we've given him antibiotics as a precaution. However, I need to ask, this type of injury in a domestic setting? You're wondering if my wife is dangerous," Malcolm said quietly. "The answer is yes, but not in the way you think." Dr. Williams studied his face. "Are you safe at home, Mr. Hicks? Is Dylan?" Malcolm considered the question. Physical safety? Probably. But emotional safety, financial security, the integrity of everything he'd built, that was already gone. "We will be," he said finally. "Thank you for taking care of my son." On the drive home, Dylan finally spoke. "Dad, I wasn't threatening her. I asked her why she was always on the phone, why she's never here anymore. She just exploded." Malcolm's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you see, Dylan?" "On her phone. Text messages. Lots of them. From someone named Wesley. She was laughing at things he said, Dad. The way she used to laugh with you." "Wesley." Malcolm filed the name away, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He'd heard Cassandra mention a Wesley Lucas, a contractor she'd supposedly hired for some minor home renovations that never seemed to materialize. "Dylan, I need you to know something," Malcolm said as they pulled into their driveway. "What happened tonight changed everything. Your mother hurt you, and my parents defended her over you. That's unforgivable. What are you going to do?" Malcolm looked at the house he'd designed himself, the life he'd built with his own hands. "I'm going to make sure justice is served. But I need you to trust me and follow my lead, no matter what happens." "Can you do that?" Dylan nodded, though Malcolm could see the uncertainty in his son's eyes. That was fine. Dylan didn't need to understand the plan. He just needed to survive it. As they entered the house, Malcolm noticed Cassandra had cleaned up the blood and was nowhere to be seen. His parents had apparently left. The house felt different now, like a stage set waiting for the final act. Malcolm helped Dylan to his room, then retreated to his home office. He had work to do, plans to make, and a very careful game to begin. He'd spent his career designing structures that could withstand any storm. Now it was time to design the perfect destruction. Chapter 3: Blueprints for Betrayal. Malcolm spent the next week conducting his own surveillance operation with the precision of a military campaign. His architectural firm, Hicks Design Group, had been his passion project for 15 years, a boutique company that specialized in high-end residential and commercial properties. The success had afforded him resources most people could only dream of, and now he intended to use every one of them. He hired a private investigator named Jamal Ponce, a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial cases. Within 48 hours, Jamal had confirmed what Malcolm already knew. Cassandra was having an affair with Wesley Lucas, a general contractor who worked on many of the homes Malcolm designed. "How long?" Malcolm asked as Jamal spread photographs across his office desk. "Best I can tell, about 8 months. Maybe longer." Jamal pointed to a series of photos showing Cassandra and Wesley entering and leaving various hotels around Denver. "They're not particularly careful about it. Seems like they think you're oblivious." Malcolm studied the images with the same intensity he brought to architectural plans. Wesley Lucas was younger than him by about 10 years, with the kind of rugged good looks that attracted women who were bored with their stable, successful husbands. But there was something else in the photos, a casualness that suggested this wasn't just physical. They looked comfortable together, like a couple planning a future. "There's more," Jamal said, producing another folder. "I did some digging into Lucas's background. Guy's got a pattern. This is his third married woman in 5 years. He targets wives of successful men, gets them emotionally invested, then what? Then he usually disappears with whatever he can get. Money, jewelry, sometimes information he can use against the husband's business. Jamal paused. But this time feels different. He's been with your wife longer than the others. I think they're planning something permanent. Malcolm absorbed this information like a computer processing data. So Cassandra wasn't just cheating, she was planning to leave. Probably thought she'd get half of everything he'd built. Maybe more if she played her cards right. She'd always been smart about money. Always knew exactly what he was worth. I need everything, Malcolm said. Every meeting, every phone call, every place they go. Financial records if you can get them legally. I want to know what they're planning before they know it themselves. Over the following days, Malcolm's investigation expanded. He discovered that Cassandra had been slowly moving money from their joint accounts into a personal account he didn't know existed. Small amounts at first, then larger sums disguised as household expenses, spa treatments, and shopping trips. In total, she diverted nearly $200,000 over the past 6 months. But the real revelation came when Malcolm traced Wesley Lucas's business dealings. The man was leveraging his relationship with Cassandra to bid on contracts for properties Malcolm had designed. Wesley had inside information about budgets, timelines, and competitor weaknesses. Information he could only have gotten from Cassandra, who had access to Malcolm's home office and occasionally overheard client meetings. They weren't just having an affair. They were stealing from him, using his own wife as a corporate spy. Malcolm sat in his office late one night, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, and felt the last vestiges of his old life slip away. The man who had built a business on trust and integrity no longer existed. In his place was someone who understood that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. His phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. "Dad, she's not here again. Third night this week." Malcolm replied, "I know. Stay in your room and lock the door. This ends soon." He pulled out a fresh legal pad and began sketching. Not a building this time, but something far more intricate. A plan that would systematically dismantle everything Cassandra and Wesley thought they were building, while ensuring they could never threaten him or Dylan again. Malcolm had always believed in the principle that a structure was only as strong as its foundation. Cassandra and Wesley had built their affair on lies, theft, and betrayal. He was about to show them what happened when someone with superior engineering skills decided to bring the whole thing crashing down. Chapter 4: Foundation Cracks. Malcolm's plan began with precision engineering. He spent the next 2 weeks appearing to be the oblivious husband while systematically documenting every aspect of Cassandra and Wesley's operation. He installed hidden cameras in his home office, ostensibly for security, but actually to record Cassandra photographing his confidential files. He hired forensic accountants to trace the money trail and cybersecurity experts to monitor her digital communications legally. But Malcolm's real masterstroke was architectural. He'd been commissioned to design a luxury resort in Aspen, a $50 million project that would cement his reputation as one of Colorado's premier architects. The project required a general contractor, and Malcolm made sure Wesley Lucas's company was invited to bid. "Sweetheart," Malcolm said over breakfast, watching Cassandra scroll through her phone, "I'm meeting with contractors today for the Aspen project. It's going to be the biggest deal of my career." Cassandra looked up with feigned interest. "That's wonderful, darling. Anyone I might know?" "Actually, yes. Wesley Lucas is bidding. Didn't you say you were thinking of hiring him for some work around here?" Malcolm watched Cassandra's face carefully. The slight flush, the way her fingers tightened on her phone. She was excited, probably already planning to text Wesley with whatever information she could gather. "Oh yes, Wesley. He seems very capable." "I'm sure he is," Malcolm said, his tone neutral. "The meeting's at 2. I'll be in my office preparing." That afternoon, Malcolm met with 5 contractors, including Wesley. The man was exactly what Malcolm had expected: confident, charismatic, and completely unaware that he was walking into a trap. Wesley's bid was competitive, well-researched, and clearly informed by inside knowledge of Malcolm's preferences and the client's budget constraints. "Impressive work," Malcolm told Wesley as the meeting concluded. Your understanding of the project specifics is remarkable. Wesley smiled. I do my homework, Mr. Hicks. When you're working with the best architect in Denver, you can't afford to be unprepared. After Wesley left, Malcolm reviewed the bids with his project manager, Lloyd Santos, who'd been with the firm for 8 years and had noticed discrepancies in recent contractor proposals. Wesley's bid is almost too good, Lloyd observed. Like he knew exactly what numbers to hit. Interesting observation, Malcolm said. What would you say if I told you someone's been feeding our competitors inside information? Lloyd's expression darkened. I'd say we have a serious problem, and I want to know who. Malcolm had been carefully cultivating Lloyd's loyalty, sharing concerns about security breaches and competitor intelligence. Lloyd was honest, hardworking, and had a strong sense of professional ethics. Exactly the kind of ally Malcolm needed for what came next. I'm going to tell you something in confidence, Malcolm said. We have a leak. Someone with access to this office has been selling information to Wesley Lucas and possibly others. Who? Malcolm paused, letting the weight of revelation settle. My wife. Lloyd's shock was genuine. Jesus, Malcolm. Are you sure? Completely. I have evidence, financial records, photos, digital communications. She's been working with Lucas for months, maybe longer. What are you going to do? I'm going to give them exactly what they think they want, Malcolm said, and then I'm going to destroy them both. That evening, Malcolm found Cassandra in their bedroom, getting dressed for another of her mysterious dinner with girlfriends meetings. How did the contractor meetings go? She asked, applying lipstick with practiced precision. Very well. I think I know who I'm going to choose for the Aspen project. Cassandra turned, trying to appear casual. Oh, who? Wesley Lucas. His bid was exactly what I was looking for. Almost like he read my mind. Malcolm watched his wife's reflection in the mirror. The satisfaction in her eyes was unmistakable. That's wonderful, she said. I'm sure he'll do excellent work. I'm sure he will, Malcolm agreed. In fact, I'm thinking of giving him even more projects. The man clearly understands how to work with me. After Cassandra left for her dinner, Malcolm retrieved a secure phone he'd purchased for this operation and made a call to a contact from his college days. A man who'd gone into corporate investigation and had connections Malcolm preferred not to think about too closely. I need a favor, Malcolm said when Rich Spears answered. And I need it to be completely untraceable. What kind of favor? The kind that ruins two people's lives without leaving fingerprints. Rich was quiet for a moment. Malcolm, we've known each other for 20 years. You're not this guy. I wasn't, Malcolm said. But circumstances change. These people hurt my son and stole from me. They think they're clever, but they have no idea who they're dealing with. What do you need? Malcolm smiled. The old Malcolm might have hesitated. The new one had already calculated the cost and decided it was acceptable. I need them to disappear. Not permanently, he clarified, but I need them gone, discredited, and unable to hurt anyone else the way they've hurt me. Chapter 5. Structural Engineering. 2 weeks later, Malcolm's trap was perfectly positioned. He'd awarded the Aspen contract to Wesley Lucas, along with a $2 million advance payment that was standard for projects of this magnitude. Wesley thought he'd won the lottery, a career-defining project that would establish his company as a major player in luxury construction. What Wesley didn't know was that Malcolm had structured the contract with specific performance milestones tied to the advance payment. Miss any deadline, fail any inspection, or violate any term of the agreement, and Wesley would owe immediate repayment of the full advance plus penalties that would bankrupt his company. The contract was legally bulletproof, crafted by Malcolm's attorney with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Wesley had signed eagerly, probably thinking his inside information would help him navigate any challenges. Meanwhile, Malcolm had been feeding Cassandra carefully crafted false information about his business dealings, his financial situation, and his future plans. She'd been passing it all along to Wesley, who was making decisions based on completely fabricated intelligence. The beauty of this plan, Malcolm explained to Lloyd as they reviewed the project timeline, is that I don't have to sabotage anything. Wesley will destroy himself trying to meet impossible expectations based on false information. Lloyd shook his head admiringly. You've basically turned his advantage into a weapon against him. It gets better, Malcolm said. I've discovered that Wesley's been using similar tactics with other clients. He's essentially running a conspiracy with multiple married women, stealing business intelligence and money. When this falls apart, it's going to take down a lot more than just him and Cassandra. Malcolm's investigation had uncovered a network of infidelity and corporate espionage that reached into several of Denver's most prominent families. Wesley had been targeting wives of successful businessmen for years, using them to gain competitive advantages in bidding wars, stock trades, and real estate deals. But Malcolm's most devastating discovery was that Wesley had been recording his encounters with these women, not just for blackmail, though that was certainly part of it, but as trophies. He had video evidence of affairs involving the wives of city councilmen, two prominent attorneys, and the CEO of Denver's largest construction company. He keeps them on encrypted drives, Rich Spears had reported. Guy's got a whole collection. Your wife is just his latest conquest. Malcolm felt a cold fury at this revelation. Cassandra wasn't just cheating. She was being used by a predator who collected married women like some men collected vintage cars. The knowledge that she'd allowed herself to be manipulated so thoroughly would have been pathetic if it weren't so dangerous to his family. That evening, Malcolm set the next phase of his plan in motion. He called Cassandra into his office, where she found him reviewing construction documents with what appeared to be serious concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked, though Malcolm could see her eyes already scanning for information she could pass along. "Problem with the s0n project," Malcolm said, making sure to sound worried. "The geological survey came back with some issues. The foundation requirements are going to be much more extensive than originally planned." This was completely false. The geological survey had been perfect, which was why Malcolm had chosen the site in the first place. But Cassandra wouldn't know that. What does that mean? It means cost overruns. Significant ones. The project budget is going to increase by at least 30%, maybe more. And all of that is going to come out of the contractor's margin. Malcolm watched Cassandra absorb this information with growing excitement disguised as concern. "That's terrible," she said. "What will you do?" "I'll have to renegotiate with Wesley. Give him a chance to adjust his bid or withdraw from the project entirely. It's only fair." That night, Malcolm monitored Cassandra's communications and watched her immediately contact Wesley with the false information. Within hours, Wesley had submitted a revised proposal that was exactly the kind of desperate overreach Malcolm had been counting on. The new bid included corners cut on materials, compressed timelines that were physically impossible to meet, and cost estimates that ignored basic engineering realities. Wesley was trying to maintain his profit margins, while accounting for the fictional cost overruns Cassandra had warned him about. Malcolm smiled as he reviewed the proposal. Wesley had just handed him everything he needed to destroy the man's reputation and trigger the contract penalties that would bankrupt his company. But this was only the beginning. The architectural plans Malcolm was designing for their destruction were far more complex than anything Wesley could imagine. Chapter 6: Load-Bearing Failures. The first sign of Wesley's downfall came 3 weeks into the s0n project. Malcolm had arranged for surprise inspections by city officials, building code experts, and environmental specialists, all perfectly legal and standard for a project of this magnitude. But time to occur when Wesley was trying to execute his corner-cutting strategy. The inspection reports were devastating. Substandard materials, improper techniques, and clear violations of the building specifications Malcolm had provided. Each failure triggered penalty clauses in the contract, racking up fines that quickly consumed Wesley's profit margin and began eating into the principal. Malcolm watched from his office as Wesley's phone calls grew increasingly frantic. The man was calling suppliers, trying to source better materials to replace the cheap alternatives he'd originally ordered. He was bringing in additional crews to accelerate the timeline, burning through cash reserves at an alarming rate. "He's panicking," Lloyd observed, reviewing the daily reports from the construction site, making emotional decisions instead of strategic ones. "That's exactly what I want," Malcolm said. "Panic leads to mistakes, and mistakes in construction can be catastrophic." But the professional destruction was only half of Malcolm's plan. The personal side was far more intricate. Malcolm had been working with Rich Spears to gather evidence of Wesley's broader criminal enterprise, the network of affairs and corporate espionage that extended far beyond Cassandra. They now had documentation of securities fraud, insider trading, and extortion involving dozens of victims across Colorado. More importantly, they'd located Wesley's collection of recordings. The encrypted drives contained evidence that would destroy multiple marriages and bring down some of Denver's most powerful men, which was exactly why Malcolm needed to control them. "We can't just turn this over to the police," Rich warned during one of their clandestine meetings. "There are too many important people involved. This kind of information could destabilize half the city's power structure." "I'm not interested in destabilizing anything," Malcolm said. "I'm interested in ensuring that Wesley Lucas and my wife never have the ability to hurt anyone again." Malcolm's plan was elegantly simple. He would use Wesley's own criminal evidence against him, but selectively. The recordings involving other men's wives would disappear forever, protecting innocent families from destruction. But the evidence of Wesley's crimes would be preserved and delivered to the appropriate authorities at precisely the right moment. As for Cassandra, her fate would be tied directly to Wesley's. Malcolm had traced their financial arrangements and discovered that she'd been receiving regular payments from Wesley's company, ostensibly for consulting services, but actually payment for the intelligence she provided. This made her legally complicit in Wesley's fraud and potentially liable for criminal charges. The beauty of Malcolm's approach was that he didn't need to fabricate evidence or commit crimes himself. Wesley and Cassandra had been building their own prison for months. Malcolm was simply ensuring they'd be locked inside it. The climax came when Wesley, desperate to salvage the Aspen project, attempted to blackmail Malcolm using some of the recorded evidence he'd gathered about other clients. Wesley apparently thought he could leverage Malcolm's relationships with mutual contacts to renegotiate the contract terms. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while Malcolm was having dinner with Dylan. "Mr. Hicks, we need to talk," Wesley said, his voice carrying a threatening edge Malcolm found almost amusing. "About what, Mr. Lucas?" "About how we're going to restructure our arrangement. I think you'll find I have some information that makes our partnership more valuable than you initially realized." Malcolm put the call on speaker so Dylan could hear. He wanted his son to understand exactly what kind of man his mother had chosen over their family. "I'm not sure what you mean," Malcolm said evenly. "I think you are. I have recordings, Mr. Hicks. Conversations involving some very important people in this city. People who value their privacy and would be grateful to someone who protected it. The threat was clear. Pay up or Wesley would release evidence that would destroy innocent families." Malcolm smiled. Wesley had just confessed to extortion on a recorded line. "Mr. Lucas," Malcolm said, his voice carrying the cold authority that had made him successful in business, "I think you misunderstand our relationship. You're an employee who has failed to meet the terms of his contract. Nothing more, nothing less." "We'll see about that," Wesley said, then hung up. Malcolm looked at Dylan, who was staring at the phone with a mixture of shock and disgust. "Dad," Dylan said quietly, "what kind of person did Mom get involved with?" "The worst kind," Malcolm replied. "But don't worry. He's about to learn what happens when you threaten a Hicks." That night, Malcolm made a call to the FBI's white-collar crime division. He had a tip about a major fraud and extortion operation, and he was ready to provide evidence. Chapter 7, Demolition Day. FBI Special Agent Marcy Zimmerman arrived at Malcolm's office on a cold Thursday morning in November, accompanied by a cybercrime specialist and a prosecutor from the district attorney's office. Malcolm had been preparing for this meeting for weeks, assembling evidence with a meticulous attention to detail that had made him one of Denver's most sought-after architects. "Mr. Hicks," Agent Zimmerman began, "you've made some serious allegations. Before we proceed, I need to understand your involvement in this situation." Malcolm had anticipated this question. "Agent Zimmerman, I'm a victim. My wife has been stealing proprietary business information and selling it to Wesley Lucas, who's been using it to defraud multiple clients and competitors. When I discovered the scheme, I began documenting everything to protect myself and my business." He handed over 3 thick folders containing financial records, communications intercepts, and photographic evidence. The cybercrimes specialist, Neil Hubbard, began reviewing the digital evidence on his laptop. "This is extensive," Hubbard said after several minutes. "Mr. Hicks, how did you obtain some of these communications?" "I hired a private investigator and used legal surveillance methods on my own property," Malcolm replied. "Everything was gathered in accordance with Colorado law." This was technically true, though Malcolm had been very selective about which evidence to present. The FBI would see Wesley's crimes clearly, but they wouldn't see the full scope of Malcolm's own investigation or the methods Rich Spears had used to obtain some of the more sensitive information. Agent Zimmerman studied the construction contract that had started the Aspen project. "This is a sophisticated trap," she observed. "You designed this contract specifically to expose Lucas's criminal behavior." "I designed it to protect my interests," Malcolm corrected. Mr. Lucas chose to respond with fraud and extortion. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Viola Fuentes, looked up from the financial records. "Mr. Hicks, your wife is deeply implicated in this conspiracy. Are you prepared for the legal consequences she'll face?" Malcolm's expression didn't change. "My wife made her choices. I'm here to ensure justice is served, regardless of personal consequences." What Malcolm didn't tell them was that he'd already filed for divorce and had moved Dylan's and his assets into protected trusts. Cassandra would face criminal charges with no financial resources and no family support. Malcolm's parents, who had been so quick to defend her after she stabbed Dylan, were about to learn exactly how thoroughly they'd backed the wrong horse. 3 hours later, the FBI had everything they needed to begin arrests. Wesley Lucas was taken into custody at the Aspen construction site, in full view of his employees and subcontractors. The charges included securities fraud, wire fraud, extortion, and racketeering, enough to put him away for 20 years if convicted. Cassandra was arrested at home while Malcolm and Dylan watched from across the street. Malcolm had sent Dylan to stay with his aunt for the week, not wanting the boy to be present for the arrest, but Dylan had insisted on witnessing this moment. "How do you feel?" Dylan asked as they watched his mother being led away in handcuffs. "Free," Malcolm said simply. But the arrests were only the beginning of Malcolm's plan. Over the next several days, the full scope of Wesley's criminal network began to unravel. The FBI discovered the encrypted drives containing recordings of dozens of affairs, along with evidence of insider trading, business fraud, and extortion stretching back 5 years. Malcolm had made sure that the evidence would expose Wesley's crimes while protecting the innocent families who had been victimized. The recordings involving other wives were mysteriously corrupted beyond recovery, while the evidence of Wesley's crimes remained pristine. The FBI assumed this was the result of Wesley's clumsy attempts to destroy evidence, never suspecting Malcolm's careful curation. The media coverage was devastating for both Wesley and Cassandra. Local news outlets painted them as predators who had targeted successful families and attempted to destroy them from within. Cassandra's behavior toward Dylan, particularly the stabbing incident, which was now part of the court record, made her especially unsympathetic to public opinion. Malcolm's business, meanwhile, experienced an unexpected surge in demand. Clients saw him as a victim who had handled a terrible situation with dignity and strength. The Aspen project, once Wesley's contract were terminated, attracted the attention of major construction companies eager to work with the architect who had exposed such a significant criminal conspiracy. But Malcolm's most satisfying victory was personal. His parents, Robert and May Hicks, who had defended Cassandra and dismissed Dylan's injuries, now found themselves on the wrong side of public opinion and family loyalty. When they called Malcolm seeking reconciliation, he delivered a message they would never forget. "You chose to protect the woman who stabbed your grandson," Malcolm told them during a brief phone conversation. "You chose her over your own family. Live with that choice, but live with it somewhere else. You're no longer welcome in our lives." Dylan, listening from across the room, nodded his approval. The boy had learned hard lessons about loyalty and betrayal, but he'd also learned that his father would protect him regardless of the cost. Chapter 8. Final Inspection. The trial began 6 months later, in the spring of Malcolm's new life. Wesley Lucas faced federal charges that would likely result in a sentence of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Cassandra, as part of a plea agreement, had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 to 7 years. Malcolm testified as the primary victim, describing how his wife and her lover had systematically stolen from his business and attempted to destroy his reputation. His testimony was calm, factual, and devastating. The jury saw him as a successful man who had been betrayed by the people closest to him, but had responded with dignity and respect for the law. What the jury didn't see was the extent of Malcolm's behind-the-scenes orchestration. They didn't know about rich spears or the carefully managed evidence or the way Malcolm had manipulated Wesley into destroying himself. As far as anyone could prove, Malcolm had simply documented crimes that were being committed against him and reported them to authorities. During cross-examination, Wesley's defense attorney tried to paint Malcolm as a vindictive husband who had orchestrated an elaborate revenge scheme. "Mr. Hicks," the attorney said, "isn't it true that you designed this entire situation to destroy Mr. Lucas and your wife?" Malcolm's response was measured and precise. "I designed a lawful contract to protect my business interests." Mr. Lucas chose to respond with criminal behavior. "I documented that behavior and reported it to the FBI. If that's revenge, then every crime victim who seeks justice is guilty of the same thing." The attorney pressed further. "You hired private investigators, installed surveillance equipment, and fed false information to your wife. Doesn't that sound like entrapment to you?" "It sounds like a man protecting his family and business from criminals," Malcolm replied. "Everything I did was legal. Everything they did was not." The testimony that truly destroyed Wesley came from his other victims, the wives he had manipulated and the businesses he had defrauded over the years. Malcolm had made sure the FBI found all of them, creating a pattern of predatory behavior that made Wesley's guilt undeniable. When Cassandra took the stand as part of her plea agreement, Malcolm watched dispassionately as she attempted to portray herself as another victim of Wesley's manipulation. She claimed he had seduced her, convinced her to steal information, and threatened her when she tried to stop. Some of this was probably even true, but Malcolm knew that Cassandra had made calculated choices every step of the way. She had chosen Wesley over her family, theft over honesty, and greed over love. The consequences she now faced were the direct result of those choices. During a recess, Cassandra's attorney approached Malcolm about the possibility of reconciliation after her sentence was served. "Mr. Hicks," the attorney said, "my client would like you to know that she's deeply sorry for what she's done. She's hoping that when she's paid her debt to society, there might be a chance for your family to heal." Malcolm's response was delivered with the same cold precision he brought to architectural specifications. "Your client is a criminal who attacked my son with a deadly weapon and stole from my business. When her sentence is complete, she'll be free to build whatever life she can manage. But she'll do it without any connection to me or my son. That door is permanently closed." The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. Wesley Lucas was found guilty on all counts. Cassandra's cooperation had earned her a shorter sentence, but she would still spend the next 5 years in federal prison. As Malcolm left the courthouse with Dylan, now 18 and preparing for college, he felt a satisfaction that was both profound and complete. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the people who had betrayed his family would never have the opportunity to hurt anyone again. "Dad," Dylan said as they walked to their car, "do you ever regret any of it?" Malcolm considered the question. Did he regret the complexity of his plan, the months of careful manipulation, the way he had systematically destroyed 2 people's lives? "No," he said finally. "Some people think forgiveness is a virtue. But forgiveness without justice is just weakness. Your mother and Wesley chose to be predators. I chose to make sure they face consequences." Chapter 9. New Construction. 2 years after the trial, Malcolm stood in his newly redesigned office, reviewing plans for what would be his most ambitious project yet, a children's hospital that would serve the entire Rocky Mountain region. Dylan was now in his sophomore year at MIT. Studying engineering and following in his father's footsteps. They spoke every week their relationship stronger than it had ever been. The stabbing incident that had started everything was now just a faint scar on Dylan's shoulder, but it had taught both father and son lessons about loyalty, justice, and the price of betrayal that they would carry for the rest of their lives. Malcolm's business had grown exponentially in the years since the trial. Clients valued his reputation for integrity and his ability to handle complex, sensitive situations with discretion. Several of the families who had been victimized by Wesley's network had become major clients, drawn to an architect who understood the importance of protecting what you'd built. Rich Spears still occasionally provided security consulting for Malcolm's firm, though their relationship had evolved into something more straightforward. The shadow world of surveillance and manipulation was behind them. Malcolm had found more satisfaction in building than in destroying. The one area where Malcolm had shown no compromise was with his parents. Robert and May Hicks had attempted multiple reconciliations over the years, sending letters, showing up at Dylan's high school graduation, even hiring a family counselor to mediate. Malcolm had ignored them all. They had chosen to defend the woman who attacked their grandson, and Malcolm believed that some betrayals were simply unforgivable. "Don't you think you're being too harsh?" Lloyd Santos had asked during one of their project meetings. Lloyd had become Malcolm's closest friend and business partner, and one of the few people who knew the full scope of what had happened during the trial. "Lloyd," Malcolm had replied, "I've learned that people reveal their true nature during crises. My parents showed me exactly who they are and what they value. That information is useful, but it doesn't create an obligation for me to maintain a relationship with them." As for Cassandra, she had been released from federal prison after serving 4 years of her sentence. Malcolm had heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working as a cashier at a grocery store in a small town outside Denver, living in a studio apartment and struggling to rebuild any kind of life. Wesley Lucas still had 8 years remaining on his sentence and would likely face additional charges when he was released. Malcolm felt no sympathy for either of them. They had made calculated decisions to betray the people who trusted them, and they had faced the logical consequences of those decisions. The fact that the consequences had been severe was a reflection of the severity of their crimes, not any particular cruelty on Malcolm's part. On a Friday evening in late autumn, Malcolm was working late in his office when Dylan called from Boston. "Dad, I've been thinking about something," Dylan said. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd handled things differently? If you just divorced Mom and moved on?" Malcolm leaned back in his chair, looking out at the Denver skyline he'd helped shape with his designs. "Do you mean would I have been happier if I'd just accepted what they did and tried to move past it? Something like that." "Dylan, your mother didn't just cheat on me. She stole from me, she endangered you, and she was part of a criminal conspiracy that hurt a lot of innocent people. If I just divorced her and let Wesley continue his operation, how many other families would have been destroyed? So you think you did the right thing?" Malcolm considered this carefully. He'd built his plan on the foundation of justice, but he'd also built it on anger, betrayal, and a desire for revenge that he'd never fully acknowledged to anyone, including himself. "I think I did the necessary thing," he said finally. "Sometimes that's the same as the right thing, and sometimes it isn't. But I can live with the consequences of my choices, which is more than I can say for the people who betrayed us." After hanging up, Malcolm walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. He'd spent 2 years building a new life on the ruins of his old one, and he was genuinely happy in a way he hadn't been for years before Cassandra's betrayal. But he also knew that the man who had orchestrated Wesley and Cassandra's destruction was still inside him, waiting patiently in case anyone else ever decided to test the boundaries of his loyalty or threaten the people he loved. Malcolm Hicks had learned that forgiveness was a luxury he couldn't afford. Justice, on the other hand, was a foundation upon which you could build anything. He returned to his desk and began reviewing plans for the Children's Hospital. It would be his greatest achievement, a building that would save lives and serve the community for generations. It would be built on honesty, integrity, and the absolute certainty that some things in life were worth protecting at any cost. Malcolm had learned to be ruthless when necessary, but he'd also learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was building something better than what had been destroyed. He'd lost a wife and gained his self-respect, He'd lost his parents and strengthened his relationship with his son. In the end, he discovered that loyalty was the only currency that really mattered, and betrayal was the one debt that could never